How's everybody doing? It's me, it sounds your professor. So I'm sure most of you may know that song. It's Metallica's "Fade to Black," and what we're going to do in this one is that we're actually going to compare and contrast two different pieces. I'm going to draw your attention to the second section of the article. The Gestalt of heavy metal. It starts on would be page 3 if you're doing in your Adobe Acrobat Reader, and it goes all the way down to, was it page 5, something like that? Yeah, to just about page 5, where it goes to rock music aesthetics. And this one's very important to kind of read and to tease out, because this is where the author makes his argument for Gestalt and what it is, and then the perception and the importance of noise, and noise as an articulator and a defining factor that actually stands out in a discourse that precludes and has its association within sociology as well as in musicology. And from dealing with me so far, that even though I'm a musicologist, and a critical cultural theorist, by trade, I use sociology very fluently and expressively inside of the work that I do. So to jam all those things together inside of one little area, and to talk about them is very important. And the term Gestalt, to really kind of get its nuance and understanding, is important. The author brings it up and he talks about it right at the very beginning, where he talks about is to perceive a category, a work in a certain category. And he quotes a Walton again, or Walton, is to perceive the gestalt of that category in the work. When we apply the aesthetic term to a work of art, according to Walton, we are not only judging the work according to certain non aesthetic features, but also judging those features to be standard, variable, and non standard in relation to the category in which the work of art is perceived to belong. Such categories include media, genre, style, forms, and so forth. And he goes on and gives some ideas of what that are, what and how that would relate. And that's very important then to our understanding, because we've actually been dealing with, if you really want to unpackage this, the gestalt of, what makes the gestalt of, rock history, in the sound of rock. And now we've come up to heavy metal, which is an area that, you know looking at it, I just kept thinking, oh man, what and how do my colleagues approach it? Okay, so the majority of my colleagues would approach heavy metal from just a linear aesthetic, perspective, and saying, here's how it developed, here's what it is. Steppenwolf used it in their, in their track "Born to Be Wild," 1970. We know that Black Sabbath, articulated it in February 13th, Friday, February 13th, 1970. We know that. um, and then we have a whole bunch of things. Here's Motorhead, and then we're just gonna jump for, we got to deal with Ace of Spades. So there's your Motorhead example. We're gonna jump forward and we're gonna look at, maybe what Metallica did. Be very very cursory and impolite to them, because they'll sue you in a heartbeat. And then we're just gonna jump forward over it, and then move into, into what punk would be, and just get off of it as fast as possible. Okay, I'm not that that quick to jump out of the rabbit hole. I want to go down and see what it's all about. Let's investigate, let's explore, let's get into it, and that's what it is, because blood, sweat, and pray every single day, no track left unheard. We got to jump into it. And I will tell you, in section 2, the author brings up a number of bands you should listen to, whether you like it or not. You should at least give a fair listening to what it is. So what I want to do this time is, I'm going to drop on you and just say that, the analysis and the terms that the author teases out in section 2, dealing with Gestalt, its relationship and understanding of noise, his relationship and codification of power, very important. Oh, and he gives you actually 4 terms. I have to bring this up. Sorry, he gives you 4 terms that you need to kind of draw attention to in relationship to heavy metal, because he talks about it as being, and he gives you the origin of the term, to the epistemology of it, which is on page, what is that, page 4? page 3 at the bottom of it, where he talks about it coming from literature, and then from Rolling Stone magazine and whatnot, in 1970. I'm telling you, this all coalesces around 1970. So you really got to take advantage of that. Where he starts talking about power and then the fan base. And it's really here on page 4 where he says, yet musicologists and sociologists seem to have little difficulty recognizing the radical stylistic diversity of heavy metal while nevertheless treating it as a coherent, perceptible, distinguishable category of music. And but he says that it's not that easy. And I would agree, it's not. As I was thinking about this, and then he goes on to the expression of power, and it's down a little bit further, where and he talks about what are the different positions of power, but he gives you, it's right here on page 4, it's the paragraph that starts, quote, my sense is that the conception of heavy metal, both popular and scholarly, tends to commit to the latter error. Typically, when Walser and others speak of the power of heavy metal, it is clear that what they have in mind is a specific conception of power, or more or less synonymous with energy, intensity, speed, vigor, and so on. Those are his points that he brings up. And he relies upon those 4 categories: energy, intensity, speed, and vigor, as in a dynamic relationship to what is power. And then literally what the author, he doesn't say it as clearly as he's intending, but for him, those categories are what helps define the gestalt, or in this case, the fingerprint or the aesthetic relationship of what metal is. So that's what I was like, all right, fine. We're going to jump into it then. So we're gonna listen to a little bit of Fade to Black, and then I'm gonna juxtapose it with Iron Maiden's Run to the Hills. So let's just continue with where we were, and I'm gonna back up a little bit with this, and I'll drop these two in the lecture notes so that way you have them, because I want you to listen to these back to back and kind of give it a sense of the identity of it. And the reason I chose these is because per Metallica's interest, they start their songs traditionally with like the longest, slowest ballad, metal ballad that you can imagine to kind of prime everybody, and then about more than about halfway through they jump into their metal prowess, sorry, where they start exploring these heavier sounds and contexts. They're really kind of unfolded. Then we get the prolific guitar solos that come through it, with the screaming, raging distortion over it. And then they're beat oriented, right? They're little hopscotch and skipping through these rhythmic variations, and it goes back and either ends very high, with this screaming, sounding nature going out with this intensity and this power, the vigor that the author brings up, or it coalesces and just has a denouement where it descends and goes back into the ballad formation. So let's listen to a little bit of this, and then I'm going to juxtapose it with Iron Maiden because there's a reason and rationale for it. Okay, so you see, even with that little situation, you can see me when I'm bobbing my head with it all, because that's that skip, that rhythmic undulation that they have, that they put into their works, which is very characteristic of their style that they like to do. They'll put in those kind of rhythmic, pushes to kind of keep everything going, and it's all based around that rhythmic cycle. Their songs are long and epic because they do this. They have this playing that's going out. It's very formulaic, as you're going to see with Iron Maiden. They follow, a very formalized, contextualized motion as well. So I'm going to skip forward because this song is 7 minutes long. So I'm going to skip forward, to get into and to kind of show where it's, we went from a ballad oriented, where the lyrics are kind of there, and then it, jumps up. We had, a little bit of, some heavy, context. There's that term again, and then it relaxed and went, back down into its lulling, ballads orientation. So let's find out where we jumped into. Let's back up just a little bit. Back up. Okay, so we got into what would be considered the guitar solo. So did you see? They're really piecemeal. They have this little rhythmic, cell that then they just keep expanding, and then when they want to change it up, and the reason I let it play a little bit longer is because you hear the tempo pickup. That's at speed that the author was talking about. Vigor, speed, intensity, and what was the other, power, right? Energy. That's the other one. So Metallica has never been short on energy. But what they're doing is that they take that little microscopic cell and then they start expanding it, and that's what you heard. So it changed its value, and that's where they started picking up the rhythm. So then they were changing the speed with it, but then they went right back. And since they had all that forward propulsion and motion, even though this song, returned back to what would be the quote unquote, ballad kind of a style of the opening, it was a little bit more open and sparse, not such a heavy distorted sound with it. It still retained that energetic momentum. So you felt the energy pushing pushing you forward. So then when they relaxed back, you still had that energy, keeping the whole song going. So then when the guitar solo eventually comes in, it has all that open space and place to play with. So now they have musical cells, they have a variation of speed, they have the intensity and the power that's already come through with the chords, the relationships there, right? And then they have the energy that those little rhythmic cells put into it. It's a really model song, complying with what it is that the authors, were talking about. So that's one of the reasons why I wanted to choose, this selection with it. And I want to listen to then the other track in variation to this, which is going to, completely, take a turn for the different. So I just gotta let these things get away, and here we go. This is Iron Maiden, Run to the Hills. White man came across the sea. He brought us pain, misery. He killed our triumphs. He killed our greed. He took our pain for his own need. We fought and hard. We fought and well. Around the flames, we gave him hell. But when it came to rush the queen, will we ever be set free? Running through those clouds and wild wastes, gathering all of the flames, chasing the redskins back to their homes, fighting them out the whole game. Murder, freedom, stabbing the back, women and children, the cowards attack. Run to the hills, run for your lives. Run to the hills, run for your lives. Okay, so you hear the difference automatically, right? But what the reason I chose these two to kind of put against each other is because this song starts off slower for Iron Maiden's, sense. And if you've never heard of or heard Iron Maiden before, give a listen to any of their albums. The classic Peace of Mind, Trooper, Aces High, you know, I mean, it's just it. The band is still going. I mean, this is amazing, And Dickinson, the lead singer. I mean, he had like vocal surgery, where he suffered a lot, and he was out for a while. And the cat is like still got pipes, galore. They did a concert here, what, about 2 years ago, and it was just ripping. A whole bunch of my students went, to the concert to do for their presentation. For a research project that they did, right? How much fun was that? Go to an Iron Maiden concert for your research project. I mean, it was awesome, and they came back. Didn't bring me a shirt. Didn't even bring me a sticker or a button. Nothing. All right. Anyways, but it was just amazing to hear some of the bootleg footage that that surfaced from the concert. I'm just gonna leave it at that. But the song starts off slower than what they were typically known for, and then it picks up. In contrast to what the Metallica one does, where the Metallica wafts back and forth between that speed intensity and then the open nature of the song, what Iron Maiden does here is that they just like it's just like a truck, this just hits the power of that entire feeling of the space. Everything is inside of there. I mean, you saw me given with the drum fills, it just like, take up every inch of available space and beat and relationship without losing the intensity of it. So and then where Metallica's guitar solo is really kind of lulling because they're writing on that open nature of what it is, relying on those little rhythmic cells that they expand and contrast, with the heavy guitar sound that they set up previously with the momentum that's going on. What Iron Maiden does is they just don't back down. They just keep densing and filling up the space with as much, range as they can. So you have the vocals that are up high all the way down to the bass. It's filling it up with the bass and the drums. And so that entire scope is filled in the entire range of it. Now, just listen to a little bit more of this because it gets even more intense if you can imagine that. The speed doesn't give up. Speed, intensity, power, energy, right? It just doesn't give up. Okay, that's the guitar solo, right? So, and this song is a complete juxtaposition. So the dialectic between these two is very strong. And dialectic is the big college word, meaning that there's a difference, between the two. The relationship is similar, but then there's a difference. And and I choose that specifically because you hear that this one just never gives up with its intensity and power, inside of it. So the guitar solo is dense, it's fast, it has all that speed, and mechanics that are built into it. We've heard, it has a strong song cycle form, as a verse, chorus, guitar solo, verse, chorus goes out. So they rely on a complete, standard structure as well, which is their model. But yet it never loses that intensity and energy, which Metallica is also known for. So now listen though to this relationship and their use of a rhythmic cell and how it is that they expand it. Okay, so you heard even with Dickinson coming in, and his vocal situation and setting it up there, is that that's the lowest. It goes back to the beginning, and what is so awesome about this piece is there's two rhythms that are going on simultaneously. Did you notice that they're singing slower than what the music is? Right, you can actually discern the vocals here. You can't discern them in Metallica whatsoever. I mean, they're so buried, and synthetically, manipulated inside the fabric of that song. But it's an eloquent song because it articulates all the points that the author brings up in, his article, and what he actually what he confines and codifies as the gestalt of heavy metal. So does the Maiden example. They both work. So there is actually something there that we can point to. The difference is that nobody agrees upon, where the fine line between alternative rock, hard rock, and heavy metal begins. And that's where he goes back and argues saying, well, it's based upon fan, understanding and relationship and analysis. It's like, sure, but are we just going to rely on, what's some, bubblegum, pop, 16-year-old kid is going to tell me that heavy metal is? I don't think so. you know, that kid barely can. He can't even pass his driver's license test. Let alone tell me. Well, maybe he could tell me what the latest heavy metal band is. But anyways, but he can't discern it. From a logical perspective, it's just his gut instinct. But that gut instinct does have some credibility because that's based upon an assumption and a knowledge of what the gestalt is. He had to have had it somewhere. So there's a relationship and understanding that even though he may not have the language to articulate what is, heavy metal, there's something that's in the fabric and the core that is drawn out that relationship and understanding of what it is. And this is why when I preface, our talk before, and I said even if you don't appreciate the style, aesthetically, you need to look at it from a sociological perspective to give it its credibility, because otherwise what you're doing is you're dismissing and discounting a whole genre of rock music and rock's history that's important, that's set up and standardizes what's going on. We would not have Van Halen without any of this going on. And by the way, these two songs are contemporary of each other, the Metallica and the Maiden example. They both came out in around, if not the same year, in the 80s, you know, as is 1984, which is, the claim to fame, for Van Halen's, big one, where we get, Hot for Teacher, Panama, and then Jump, the opening track of it, as well as the opening synthesizer sounds of, Eddie Van Halen, where he wanted to explore more keyboard styles as well as his guitar prowess, is guitar, proficiency. It's an awesome article. It really kind of opens up a lot of questions, but I wanted to juxtapose these two together because he only mentions Metallica like maybe a couple of times. He doesn't mention Iron Maiden, so I wanted to do something that was a little bit different with it all. So, if you have any questions, let me know. I will drop these tracks inside of the lecture notes for you all, so you can listen to them at your leisure, and don't forget to read that section because next time we come back, we're going to unpack it a little bit more. And let me know if you enjoy these kind of workings and such. I don't hear from anybody yet, so I don't like it when I don't hear from people. So get out of here, have fun. If you have any questions, drop me an email, and go.